Okay, we're going to get started here. Good morning and welcome to the Department of Housing and Community Development's Division of Federal Financial Assistance, or DFFA's National Housing Trust Fund Workshop. We will review the NHTF Notice of Funding Availability, or NOFA, final NHTF guidelines, and the NHTF online application. First, let's review a few housekeeping items. All participants' lines are muted upon entry. The chat feature are disabled for this webinar. Please use the Q&A feature to enter your questions. A dial-in option is available with the registration link. This recording, the PowerPoint slides, and FAQ will be available and posted on our website within a couple of weeks after this webinar. We have folks ready to answer questions in the Q&A. However, if we are not able to respond to your question during this session, we will respond to your question with the published FAQ. Before we introduce the DFFA leadership and NHTF team members and dive into the NOFA, I would like to acknowledge and thank all of our developer sponsors, property management companies, resident services providers, lead supportive services providers, consultants, other partners, and the department staff, such as our guest panelists, Lisa Campbell from Tribal Legal Affairs Division, Mary Lindblad Fry, and Amy Lopez from Tribal Affairs. Thank you all for your individual and collective contribution in making the NHTF program successful by building affordable multifamily rental housing throughout the state of California. Our DFFA leadership team includes Sasha Hoswald, our Deputy Director, Alicia Sebastian, Assistant Deputy Director, and Willa Darley Chapin, our Housing Branch Manager. In the order of the presentation lineup, the panelists also include Mylin Tran, Shelley Sharma, Michael Ostro, Debbie Gentile, Latasha Everett, Kendra Gubadulin, Colleen O'Mara, Virginia Correa, Kirsten Larson, Heather Randrup, Jessica Mora, Lisa Flower, Joe McNicholas, and Henry Chang. Next, we'll review the NHTF portfolio and removal of barriers from the NOFA and final guidelines as a result of our outreach to Native American entities, followed by Section 1 of the NOFA. The NHTF program is one of the department's youngest portfolios. We have awarded over 30 affordable projects in the last 6 years with nearly $250 million. The NHTF assisted projects contain over 2,200 total units with an average of 70 total units per project. Inclusive of the total units, over 1,000 are NHTF assisted with an average of 32 NHTF assisted units per project. All NHTF units are restricted to households at or below 30% of area median income, and units range from studio to 4-bedroom units. The purpose of the NHTF program is to provide funding to support the development of affordable rental housing for extremely low-income households in accordance with the state's NHTF allocation plan, in which all NHTF activities are restricted to multifamily rental housing to ELI households with incomes no greater than 30% AMI. The NHTF activities are subject to federal regulations and state NHTF guidelines. If the total national allocation for any fiscal year exceeds $1 billion, the department may use up to 25% of its annual allocation to serve very low-income households at or below 50% of AMI. However, to date, that threshold has not been met. Next, we'll review NHTF program's Native American entities outreach efforts and impact to the NOFA and guidelines. Here is a list of all of the NHTF program outreach efforts and engagements with Native American entities. We'll begin with the results of our Native American entities outreach and removal of NOFA barriers. The definition of Native American entity was broadened to include non-federally recognized tribes in the NOFA and guidelines. We've added 30 more days to submit the NHTF funding application to the department. And at time of the application, the Native American entity applicant can supply an uncertified TSR from the BIA LTRO due to the delays in obtaining a certified TSR. Please note the TSR must be certified before construction closing. When a ground lease is executed by a Native American entity to create the leasehold interest on a federal tribe or restricted land where the project is to be located, it is acceptable after approved by the BIA, which modifies 25 CCR subsection 8316 leasehold requirements. NHTF loan and affordability terms have been modified from 55 years to 50 years for projects on Native American land. NHTF funding is available to Native American entities as grants or loans, whereas non-Native American entities are only eligible for loans. We set up a pool of funds only for Native American entities, which is 10% of the total funds available to compete for funding in this NOFA round, versus competing against all projects throughout the state within a general pool of funds. In the rating and ranking merits of a project in maintaining or improving access to a community section, Native American entity applicants, amenities, services offered or will be offered within 15 miles of the project will receive full points versus the previous requirement of 1.5 miles of the project. In the project readiness section, where a project is located on Native American land and tribal design review is not required, a self-certification submission will receive full points versus requiring local design review approval. Also in rating and ranking, confirmation of local need of the NOFA, Native American entities will receive full points versus receiving less than full points based on CHAZ data and or a needs letter from the city or county. In rating and ranking location efficiency or walkability to amenities, projects located on Native American land will receive full points for the US EPA Walkability Index map versus less than full points given the distance of services and amenities average 15 miles from Native American lands. In the rating and ranking project readiness section, where a project is located on Native American land, CEQA compliance is the responsibility of the department. Native American entity projects may utilize the department's resources to meet environmental requirements on a case-by-case basis. Next, we'll review the results of Native American entities outreach and removal of barriers in the guidelines. The NHTF guidelines and our NOFA are subject to AB 1010 and through Native American entity outreach to provide a greater understanding of the proposed project. Please note, AB 1010 is not applicable to modify or waive federal and state NHTF statutory requirements or NHTF regulatory requirements. Native American entity projects located on Native American land are exempt from specific accessibility requirements pursuant to Native American Housing Assistance and Self-Determination Act, or NHTF. Native American entity projects located on Native American land are subject to Age Discrimination Act, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, and Indian Civil Rights Act, and exempt from Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Title VIII of the Civil Rights Act of 1968. For projects located on Native American land, a Phase 1 environmental site assessment and appraisal may be provided based on data available versus requiring data that may not be available for Native American land. Native American entities that have formally adopted tribally determined wage, or TDW, will be acceptable in lieu of federal and state prevailing wage laws. Housing First core components will not be applicable when using IHBG and TAOS pursuant to NHTSA and CFRs provided herein. Projects located on Native American land must be duly encumbered with a declaration of restrictive covenants that make the project comply for an initial affordability term of 50 years versus 55 years. Projects to be developed on Native American land are exempt from demonstrating compliance with the housing element requirements. And now, please welcome our next presenter, Mylin Tran.
Thank you, Anne. Good morning. My name is Mylin Tran, NHTF Program Manager. We will now review fiscal years 2022 and 2023 NOFA. With the combined fiscal years, the department is excited to announce the availability of approximately $172 million in federal NHTF program funding. For those new to the program, NHTF was established under Title I of the Housing and Economic Recovery Act of 2008. Unlike home and CDBG, NHTF is funded through an assessment on loans backed by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. In January 2015, HUD established an NHTF interim rule that remains in effect today. The intent of the NHTF program is to complement existing federal, state, and local efforts to increase and preserve the supply of safe, decent, and sanitary affordable housing for households with the lowest incomes. A quick reminder for the audience, we presented our draft NHTF guidelines for a 30-day comment period in April 2023 and made updates to the NOFA and guidelines based on feedback. The FAQs, public comments, and response will be posted on the NHTF website. October 25th, which is today, we will be releasing the NOFA and the final guidelines. November 1st, release of the online application. Beginning November 8th, 2023, completed online applications may be submitted to allow staff to begin processing, given we anticipate a large volume of applications to be submitted. December 28th, 2023, applications due for the rural areas target and the non-rural areas general pool of funds, which we're calling Group 1. February 1st, 2024, applications due for the Native American entities and federally declared disaster areas target funds, which we're calling Group 2. No later than May 2024, Group 1 awards will be announced. No later than July 2024, Group 2 awards will be announced. Please note, Group 2 may include complex projects from Group 1, applications that require longer review. The department strongly encourages all potential applicants to request a pre-application technical assistance appointment prior to submitting the application. Pre-application TA appointments are intended to increase familiarity with the federal NHTF regulations, guidelines, and NOFA requirements, and will allow potential applicants to discuss their proposed project with program staff to determine if the project is compatible with the program. To request a pre-application TA appointment, please email detailed questions with your contact information to nhtf@hcd.ca.gov. And that will help us line up the appropriate staff with the expertise to answer specific questions on the proposed NHTF projects. The department will accept competitive online applications for the following types of projects: a new project, new construction, or substantial rehab, and a project that receives an HHC award with a federal fiscal year 21 allocation and has not commenced construction. Competitive application evaluation is subject to the NHTF guidelines, application minimum requirements, and selection criteria, which is the rating, ranking, and eligibility for funding for competitive allocations. It is the applicant's responsibility to ensure that the submitted application is clear, complete, and accurate. Department staff may request clarifying information. No information, whether written or oral, will be solicited or accepted if this information would result in a competitive advantage to an applicant or a competitive disadvantage to other applicants. If the department deems the application incomplete or it fails to provide the minimum requirements, the application may be given an opportunity to appeal the determination following the guidance in the appeals section of the NOFA. Applicants must create an eCivis grants management profile prior to completing an application. Once the profile is completed, the applicant must complete an application via the eCivis grants management system portal. Application forms are available on the NHTF website, which will be shared on the presentation chat forum. The department will not accept applications through personal, postal, and/or shipment deliveries, fax, email, walk-ins, or any other forms of delivery other than the eCivis management system portal. Information provided in the application will become public record, available for review by the public pursuant to the Public Records Act, PRA. As such, any materials provided will be disclosable to any persons requesting or making a request under the PRA. The department cautions applicants to use discretion in providing information not specifically requested, including but not limited to bank account numbers, personal phone numbers, and home addresses. By providing this information to the department, the applicant is waiving any claim of confidentiality and consents to the disclosure of submitted material upon receipt of a PRA request. The department understands the unique challenges of the current funding environment. Therefore, the department will allow NHTF NOFA applicants to pursue funding for more than one department funding program. Separate concurrent applications to other HCD program funding sources is permitted under the NHTF NOFA. These applicants, however, must submit within each application a disclosure of all department applications under review and/or applications anticipated to be submitted. All anticipated applications with NOFA to the NHTF NOFA applications due date must be disclosed to NHTF NOFA staff no later than the respective NHTF application deadline. In addition, applicants must notify NHTF program staff via the NHTF NOFA mailbox at the time the additional applications are submitted. Sharing new information, the department's federal funding programs, including HHC and NHTF, are no longer included in the 2 loans and 2 grants limitations in the amended repeal of the stacking prohibition of multiple department funding sources. And now please welcome our next presenter, Shelly Sharma.
Thank you, Mylin. My name is Shelly Sharma, one of the NHTF program managers, and I will be going over Section 2, Program Requirements. In order to receive NHTF funds, applicant entities must meet the definition of a recipient, have site control, which can be shown in 4 ways, the first being a fee title, evidenced by a current title report dated within 90 days of application, a title status report or TSR, and an attorney's written opinion regarding chain of title and status. 3, a leasehold interest with provisions enabling the leasee to make improvements. And 4, a leasehold interest created through a ground lease held by a Native American entity in federal, tribal trust, or restricted lands where the project property is to be approved or will be approved by the U.S. Department of Interior's Bureau of Indian Affairs, or BIA, in compliance with the NHTF guidelines and this NOFA. Resolve any open audit findings for any state or federal funded programs to the satisfaction of the department or federal agency by which the finding was made, are not debarred or suspended from participation in federal or state housing programs, have resolved compliance monitoring issues or findings, and are current on compliance monitoring fee payments and or current loan payments for any department funded housing or community development projects And lastly, cities, counties, and local public housing authorities must comply with the submittal requirements of cost principles and audit requirements at 2 CFR Part 200. NHTF funds may be used for acquisition, rehabilitation, and/or new construction, or solely as a permanent loan. Activities and costs are eligible only if the housing upon project completion meets the property standards, including compliance with accessibility requirements. All loans must include terms that are consistent with the following. Loans must not exceed the maximum per unit subsidy under which the applicant applied for NHTF funding. The loan will not bear interest unless the department increases this rate. Loan payment commitment must have an initial term of 55 years or more in alignment with the state-required 55-year affordability period. For projects on Native American entities, the loan term is for 50 years in alignment with the 50-year affordability period. The loan may be forgiven by the department at the end of the loan term. Loan term will align with subsection C1C of this NOFA with no residual receipts or periodic payment requirements during the life of the loan if the following are all true, as determined by the department in its sole and absolute discretion. The recipient remains in good standing with the California Secretary of State, and the project is not in default under the terms of any of the department's loan documents. Where a Native American entity recipient project is located on Native American land, it may be exempt from specific accessibility requirements or otherwise exempted by the NHTF or other federal or tribal laws. Applicants applying for non-rural areas, rural areas target, or federally declared disaster areas target funds may select a forgivable loan. An applicant applying for Native American entity target funds may select a forgivable loan, grant, or a combination of forgivable loan and grant. Grants for Native American entities must have an affordability period of 50 years or more where the project is located on Native American land. For projects located outside of Native American land, the grants for Native American entities must have an affordability term of 55 years or more. Residual receipts or periodic payments are not required during the life of the grant if the following are true, as determined by the department in its sole and absolute discretion. Grants are made specifically for the project and must go directly to the project. Grant funds are not provided to the recipients. All projects must maintain fiscal integrity as defined in Section 2 of the guidelines for a minimum of 30 years to meet 24 CFR subsection 93.300B. Capitalized Operating Subsidy Reserve. A COSAR is currently not being offered. HUD is working on further guidance for the NHTF COSAR. For recipients that are an Indian tribe, as defined at 25 USC 4103(13), or a tribally designated housing entity, as defined at 25 USC 4103(22), thus federally recognized tribe, the project is not in default under the terms of any of the department's loan documents for that project. For a recipient that is not a federally recognized tribe and is either listed in the Bureau of Indian Affairs Office, a federal acknowledgement petitioner list, and has formed and controls a special purpose entity, or an Indian tribe located in California that is on the contact list maintained by the Native American Heritage Commission. The recipient shall remain in good standing with the California Secretary of State, and the project is not in default under the terms of any of the department's loan documents for that project. Moving on to project requirements. Recipients are responsible for project compliance with Section 5 project requirements of the NHTF guidelines, which Latasha will provide more detail on during the guidelines presentation. For maximum awards and per unit NHTF assistance limits, the maximum NHTF capital loan or grant amount is $20 million per project. In accordance with AB 434, The total amount of multifamily loan funds a project may receive from the department is capped at $50 million per project. The stacking repeal memo limiting 2 loans and 2 grants no longer includes federal funds from the department. The maximum per unit development subsidy amounts are based on the TCAC 2023 threshold basis limits. This NOFA makes funding available to projects in all jurisdictions of California. There are 3 target areas, with the first being rural areas. The department will target 20% for projects located in rural areas. A project competing in the rural areas target must demonstrate the project area is rural under one of the 3 methodologies. 1, being a non-metropolitan county. 2, rural housing service eligible area. Or 3, having small city status. A list of rural areas as well as methodology to determine rural or non-rural status can be found on the TCAC website. Next is the Native American entities target. The department will target 10% of NHTF funds for projects developed by or in partnership with Native American entities. Applicant meets the definition of Indian tribe under Section 4103(13)B of Title 25 of United States Code. Applicant meets the definition of tribally designated housing entity under 25 U.S. Code 4103(22), or if the applicant is not a federally recognized tribe as identified above, the applicant is either listed in the Bureau of Indian Affairs Office or Federal Acknowledgement Petitioner List and has formed and controls a special purpose entity in compliance with 25 CCR subsection 8313.2, or is an Indian tribe located in California that is on the contact list maintained by the Native American Heritage Commission for the purposes of consultation pursuant to GC section 65352.3 and has formed and controls a special purpose entity. The third and final target is the federally declared disaster areas target. The department will target 20% of available funds for projects located in federally declared disaster areas pursuant to the HUD memorandum dated May 17th, 2023, applicable to the federally declared disaster areas under Title V of the Stafford Act, dated April 3rd, 2023, and DR 4683CA, dated January 27th, 2023. The federally declared disaster areas are the following counties listed on your screen, as well as in the NOFA for reference. Next, I will go over the target area's percentage of available funds and carryover funds. For calculation purposes, applications for the 10% Native American entities target and the 20% for the federally declared disaster areas target will not be counted towards the 20% rural areas target, even if the project is located in a rural area, unless the funds for the Native American entities target or federally declared disaster areas target are oversubscribed, in which case Native American entity or federally declared disaster area projects located in rural areas will be counted towards the rural areas target. Any unused funds in either of those categories will be reallocated to the general pool of funds, including any carryover funds from these target areas. If funds for the federally declared disaster areas target are not fully utilized, any unused funds will be reallocated to the general pool of NHTF program funds. As presented, here is a summary of the funds available for this NOFA round. I will now be going over Section 3, Application Minimum Requirements. Please remember that this presentation is only a summary and not a complete representation of the entirety. Please see the NHTF program guidelines for complete details. Applications for projects are required to meet the program application minimum requirements found in the NHTF guidelines, NOFA, and 24 CFR subsection Part 93. Applications must meet the following minimum requirements in order to move forward to the rating and ranking process. An applicant must electronically submit its application in a format made available by the department that requests the information required by the guidelines. Please make note, people within your organization must be set up within the eCivis profile to submit or receive correspondence for the project, and only the people that are set up within the eCivis profile will be able to submit documentation or will be notified of any correspondence. The department recommends at least 3 people from your organization have eCivis profile shared access. Shared access is having multiple people within the organization having access to the application. More details regarding the application and profile setup will be discussed in the application navigation section. An applicant must submit its application by the deadline specified in the NOFA. Housing element. Applicants that meet the definition of a local public entity, or cities and counties, are required to be in substantive compliance with the state housing element law prior to award date. Newly incorporated cities are exempt from this factor, until which time the city is required to submit the housing element to the department for approval. It is the responsibility of the cities and counties to know their reporting requirements. If unsure, please send an email inquiry to the NHTF NOFA unit at nhtfnofa@hcd.ca.gov. Developers and projects to be developed on Native American land are exempt from this requirement. These entities will receive full points for this scoring factor. All applications must clearly contain the required documents listed in the NHTF Guidelines, Section 3, eligible recipients or applicants. Any third-party documents, including but not limited to market study, appraisal, relocation plan, environmental assessments that are prepared by an individual or firm which have the appropriate license when deemed necessary by the department or by regulation, and knowledge and experience necessary to competently prepare the document, is aware of, understands, and correctly employ those recognized methods and techniques that are necessary to produce a credible and complete document, communicate each analysis, opinion, and conclusion in a manner that is not misleading as to the true market needs for low-income residential property and the value and condition of the subject property, and lastly, is an independent third party having no identity of interest with the applicant, the partners of the applicant, or the intended partners. The department must not make an award of NHTF funds to any applicant unless the application is received by the deadlines specified in the NOFA and clearly demonstrate the applicant and project are eligible to receive NHTF funds from the department under Guidelines Section 3, eligible recipients, and Section 4, eligible uses, terms, and limits of NHTF funds. The applicant and project meet the requirement of Guideline Section 5, project requirements, Section 6, underwriting, and Section 7, management and maintenance, before the department will disperse NHTF funds. The application is complete pursuant to Guidelines Section 9, application minimum requirements. The total amount of NHTF funds requested by the applicant does not exceed maximum per unit subsidy and award limits in the NOFA, and there are no pending lawsuits that will prevent implementation of the project. This concludes Section 3, and we will now move on to Section 4. I will continue on by moving to Section 4, rating and ranking. After meeting the threshold requirements, applications will be scored as follows. Additionally, applications must achieve the following minimum scores in each scoring section to be eligible for funding. For Section A, increase housing affordability by leveraging rental and operating subsidies, the minimum points required is 0 and the maximum is 10. Applicants will be scored on the percentage of NHTF assisted units that have committed project-based rental or operating subsidies substantially similar in terms to project-based vouchers to ensure affordability for residents. 1 point will be awarded for each 10% of NHTF assisted units point increment. Pursuant to the Health and Safety Code subsection 50676D2, this NOFA gives priority to projects based on the extent to which rents are affordable, especially to extremely low-income families. Section B, merits of the project in maintaining or improving access to community-based public services. The minimum points required is 1, and the maximum is 20. Amenities and services offered within 1.5 miles of the project may be awarded points cumulatively across the categories. For Native American entity applicants, amenities and services must be offered within 15 miles of the project. All applicants must provide a map demonstrating proximity of services and amenities listed in this NOFA. Section C, project readiness. The minimum points required is 20 and the maximum is 35. Project readiness is identified in this slide. For projects on Native American land, completion and submittal of the NHTF Environmental Provisions Checklist and completion of a Phase 1 environmental site assessment and Phase 2, if necessary, a corrective action plan when applicable, and NEPA responsibility entity verification of project readiness document as applicable. Please note, the department will satisfy any environmental clearances required pursuant to CEQA when applicable. The department recognizes that CEQA requirements do not apply on Native American land, and if CEQA is required, the department may be responsible for carrying out any CEQA requirements. Native American entity projects may utilize department resources to meet project environmental requirements on a case-by-case basis. Section D, projects use of non-federal funds. The minimum points required is 0 and the maximum is 10. The application will calculate points based on the extent of non-federal funds contributing to the project. Points are derived from the amount of requested NHTF funds compared to the non-federal funds. Section E, development team's experience. The minimum points required is 20 and the maximum is 40. We will be looking for developer experience, applicant ownership and operations experience, owning or operating supportive and/or affordable rental housing developments, property management experience, the number of affordable housing developments managed by the designated property management agent at the time of application, resident service provider experience, the years of experience in resident services and number of projects or contracts, lead supportive service provider or LSP experience, the years of experience in permanent supportive housing, number of projects or contracts in permanent supportive housing, years of experience serving the target population, experience providing comprehensive case management where members of the target population were at least 20% of the LSP's clients during the years for which points are sought in any of the following. Experience with a partner agency with an executed agreement between the two agencies that meet the requirements of Section 9 of the NHTF guidelines, and success in meeting or exceeding specified outcome measures for housing stability under a government contract for at least 2 years as a LSP in permanent supportive housing serving persons experiencing homelessness. Lastly, Section F, confirmation of local need. The minimum points required is 5 and the maximum is 15. We will be looking for demonstrated need based on the county's percentage of renters that are both extremely low income and severely cost burdened. Data will be pulled from the 2015 to 2019 CHAZ, or Comprehensive Housing Affordability Strategy, data. a needs letter from the city and/or county demonstrating overall need. And lastly, Native American entity applicants are to select Native American entity on the NHTF application to receive full points for Section F. The total minimum applicable points are 80, and the total maximum are 130. Applications will be given priority points based on 2 items: addressing and preventing homelessness and a readiness plan. With the addition of these, an application may earn a maximum of 30 points. Thus, the maximum applicable points an application can receive with the addition of priority points is 160. In addition to the minimum points required under each scoring section, applications must meet a minimum total score of 80 points to be eligible to receive an award. Tiebreaker. In the event of a tie amongst applications, the department must assign a higher rank to applications with a greater readiness to proceed with their project's milestones. If any tied applications have equal readiness to proceed with their project's milestones, then the department must assign a higher rank to the applications that have secured all written financial commitments for its project's funding. If any tied applications have equal readiness to proceed with their project's milestones and have secured an equal amount of firm written financial commitments for their project's funding, then the department must assign a higher rank to any of the applications with projects providing greater percentage of units targeting households at or below 30% of AMI. Here is a chart summarizing the scoring category and maximum applicable points covered in this NOFA, up to 160 total maximum points. This will be used as your self-score when submitting your application. Our team will review and score your application to determine your final score. Applications will be scored based on a standard process used consistently and applied fairly to all applications. Be sure to stay until the end of the presentation for more details demonstrated by Joe and Henry during the application presentation. I will now hand off to Michael Ostro to go over the next section.
Thank you, Shelley. We'll be going over section 5 through 9 of the NOFA. I will outline some of the items and cover the main key points. It's important to read the NOFA and guidelines in its entirety to gain a full understanding of the National Housing Trust Fund program. Applicants may appeal the department's written determination that an application is incomplete, has failed threshold review, or has otherwise been determined to provide an insufficient basis for an award. Applicants may not make an appeal related to another applicant's eligibility, point score award, denial of award, or any other matter related to another applicant's application. The appeal process only applies to the Department of Housing and Community Development's decision made under this NOFA. Continuing with the appeal process, a written submission with all the relevant facts, arguments, and evidence on which the appeal is based on must be submitted to the NHTF NOFA email inbox at hcd.ca.gov. The appeals must be received by the department no later than 5 business days from the date that was made in response to the application. No new information will be accepted that would result in a competitive advantage. Once the appeal is submitted, no further information will be accepted. A decision will be made after review for compliance with the NHTF guidelines and this NOFA. All decisions rendered shall be final, binding, and conclusive, and shall constitute the final action of the department. And this concludes Section 5. Section 6, disbursement of funds. Eligible pre-development costs may be reimbursed no more than 24 months from the fully executed standard agreement. Disbursement for acquisition and construction draws on a reimbursement basis. 10% of the development hard costs will be retained and released after the department approves the project completion and loan closing requirements in the standard agreement. And this concludes Section 6. Section 7, federal and state requirements. The NHTF funds are subject to commitment and expenditure deadlines as defined in the federal NHTF regulations, state NHTF allocation plan, and standard agreement. The timeframe for using these funds necessitate the execution of the standard agreement by October 1st, 2024. Construction will need to start by October 1st, 2024, and must be expended by HUD's expenditure of October 1st, 2027. The department charges a monitoring fee for all NHTF funded projects during the affordability period. As illustrated in this chart, the NHTF monitoring fee is different from the 0.42 fee collected by other HCD programs. The monitoring fee is determined by the total number of NHTF assisted units and is collected after conversion to permanent financing. If the project has other HCD funding sources, there will be a separate monitoring fee collected for that program. Please note, the annual monitoring fees may change based on the department's annual determination of the actual cost of project monitoring, and that is approximately 3% annually. Heather will go into greater detail on the reporting requirements in Section 13 of the guidelines. Applicant sponsors are responsible for disclosing all changes to the project since submitting the application. This concludes Section 7. Section 8, Program Overlays. Activities funded with NHTF are required to comply with 24 CFR Section 93.350 and Section 93.301. Compliance includes, but is not limited to, environmental provisions, relocation, equal opportunity, and fair housing. The applicant must provide a complete NHTF environmental provisions checklist using the department's template and turned in at the time of the application along with the supporting documentation. If a project cannot meet the provisions, the project cannot be funded by the National Housing Trust Fund. Native American entity applicants may use department resources to comply with environmental provisions. For questions on environmental provisions, please email nepa@hcd.ca.gov and copy Kirsten Larson at hcd.ca.gov. More details will be presented by Kirsten Larson when we present the Section 9 in the guidelines. This concludes Section 8. Section 9, Other Terms and Conditions. A few more terms and conditions to be aware of regarding the Department of Housing and Community Development's National Housing Trust Fund, NOFA. The department reserves the right to modify or suspend at its sole discretion the provisions of this NOFA at any time. If this were to happen, the department will notify all interested parties via the listserv and post the revisions to the National Housing Trust website. The NOFA is not a commitment of funds to any activity or applicant. In the event of a conflict between the NOFA and the guidelines, the National Housing Trust Fund guidelines will control. The last point is important. Any false claims or statements to HUD or the department may be subject to penalties and may be ineligible for award under this NOFA. This concludes my section of the NOFA. There's been a lot of information to absorb, so let's take a short brain break and return in 5 minutes. When we return, Debbie will continue on Section 1 of the guidelines. Thank you.
Welcome back from the short intermission. I am Debbie Gentile, Representative 2 of the National Housing Trust Fund Program. We will now be going over the final NHTF guidelines, followed by the NHTF online application. The contents in Section 1, Introduction of the Guidelines, was covered by Ann at the beginning of the NOFA presentation. Next, I'll go over Section 2 definitions. The definitions found in 24 Code of Federal Regulations, or CFR subsection 93.2, and 25 California Code of Regulations, or CCR subsection 8301, apply to these NHTF guidelines. In addition, the definitions in these guidelines will provide guidance and prevail if they conflict with the definitions in the regulations on this slide. We're not going to read through all of the defined terms. However, there have been some changes since the draft guidelines workshop on April 26th and 27th of 2023. The terms on the slides have been added or revised. When you see capitalized terms throughout the guidelines, please be sure you refer back to Section 2 of these guidelines. Section 3. Eligible recipients, also referred to as the applicant section, was covered by Shelley in Section 2 of the NOFA. I will now turn it over to Latasha.
Good morning. I am Latasha Everett, Representative 2 of the NHTF program, and I will be going over Section 4, eligible uses, terms, and limits of NHTF funds. Where a Native American entity recipient project is located on Native American lands, it may be exempt from specific accessibility requirements where otherwise exempted by the NHAH, SDA, or other federal or tribal laws. A recipient use of NHTF funds is subject to 24 CFR Part 93, Subpart E, pursuant to 24 CFR subsection 93.200 A1. Activities and costs are eligible only if the housing upon project completion meets the property standards in 24 CFR subsection 93.301. This includes the department and any other authorized representative of the department conducting progress and final inspections of the project's construction to ensure that work is done in accordance with applicable codes, the construction contract, and construction documents. All loans must include terms that are consistent with the following. Loans must not exceed the maximum per unit subsidy as published in the NOFA under the applicant applied for NHTF funding. The loan will not bear interest unless the department increases this rate pursuant to Health and Safety Code subsection 50406.7 of the regulations. Loans must have an initial term of 55 years or more. For projects on Native American land, loans must have an initial term of 50 years or more. The recipient must pay fees to the department, monitoring fees that Michael covered in the NOFA. Next is Section 5, project requirements. Although all projects that receive NHTF funds are subject to 24 CFR subsection 93.302 subparts G for a minimum of 30-year federal affordability period. Assembly Bill 816 requires department to restrict affordability for 55 years through a recorded and enforceable affordable covenant. For NHTF assisted projects located on Native American land, the affordability requirement is for a minimum of 50 years. This is an exception to the rent limits. If there is a state or federal project-based rental subsidy and the household does not pay more than 30% of their adjusted monthly income, then the maximum rent is the rent allowable under the rental subsidy. The rents for units where tenants use a portable voucher are subject to NHTF rent limits. The rent and tenant paid utilities for extremely low income families must comply with 24 CFR subsection 93.302 B1I and B2. Rents may not exceed the NHTF rent limits published annually by HUD, by unit size and county MSA, which represents 30% what's considered affordable, of 30% AMI, or the poverty line, whichever is greater, for a household consisting of 1.5 persons per bedroom on a monthly basis. This includes the federal affordability requirements under the Title 24 Code of Federal Regulations, referred to by these guidelines as the federal affordability period. The requirements of this subsection run concurrently with other requirements of this subsection. Projects located on Native American land must be duly encumbered with the declaration of restricted covenants to comply with subsections 5A through 5D of the NHTF guidelines for an initial term of 50 years. Projects owned or developed by a city, county, or local housing authority must be located within their geographical boundaries of their jurisdiction. All projects must follow the core components of Housing First under Welfare and Institutions Code, subsection 8255B. Tenant screening and selection practices that promote accepting applicants regardless of their sobriety or use of substance, completion of treatment, or participation in services. Applicants are not rejected on the basis of poor credit or financial history, poor or lack of rental history, criminal convictions unrelated to tenancy, or behaviors that indicate a lack of housing readiness. Acceptance of referrals directly from shelters, street outreach, drop-in centers, and other parts of crisis response systems frequent by vulnerable people experiencing homelessness. Supportive services that emphasize engagement and problem solving over therapeutic goals, and service plans that are highly tenant driven without predetermined goals. Participation in services or program compliance is not a condition of permanent housing tenancy. Tenants have a lease and all the rights and responsibilities of tenancy, as outlined in California's Civil Health and Safety and Government Codes. The use of alcohol or drugs in and of itself without other lease violations is not a reason for eviction. Tenants based on criteria other than first come, first serve, including but not limited to the duration of chronically of homelessness, vulnerability to early mortality, or high utilization of crisis services. Prioritization may include triage tools developed through local data to identify high cost, high need homeless residents, case managers, and service coordinators who are trained in and actively employ evidence-based practices for client engagement. Services are informed by a harm reduction philosophy for drug and alcohol use and addiction as part of tenants' lives. The project and specific apartment may include special physical features that accommodate disabilities. Projects must maintain fiscal integrity for a minimum of 30 years to satisfy the federal NHTF requirements and is defined in Section 2 of the guidelines. as the total amount of operating income plus funds released pursuant to the regulatory agreement from the operating reserve account is sufficient to pay operating expenses, debt service, fund reserve accounts, and other extraordinary costs permitted by the regulatory agreement. Projects may contain fixed or floating NHTF assistant units. A fixed NHTF unit is a permanently designated NHTF unit and must remain the same throughout the period of affordability. For example, if units number 1 through 10 are NHTF designated units, these units will always remain the same with the consistent features and amenities, example, appliances, and fixtures throughout the affordability period. A floating NHTF unit must be comparable in terms of size, features, and number of bedrooms to the originally designated NHTF unit. If there are 10 NHTF units, they may be located anywhere in the project as long as they meet the floating requirements. Floating units may change to maintain conformity with the requirements. The final determination regarding fixed floating units will be made by staff in the underwriting process through the cost allocation analyst to ensure compliance with CFR subsection 92.205 D1. All projects on Native American land, Native American fee land, and non-Native American land are subject to the inspections and financial oversight requirements under 24 CFR subsection 93.404 D and E, which we'll review in greater detail on the following slides. Recipient must agree and thereby authorize the department and any authorized representative of the department to enter the property project during construction and thereafter, inspect the construction of the project as mandated by 24 CFR subsection 93.301. These rights to inspect must include, but not be limited to, the right to inspect all work done, all materials and equipment used or to be used, and all books and records, including payroll records, maintained in connection with the construction work. Advance written notice will be provided by the department to the recipients. Recipient must agree that once having undertaken any inspection, neither the department nor the department's representative shall incur any liability for failing to make any such inspection properly or for failing to complete any such inspection. It is further agreed that the fact that such inspection may or may not have occurred does not relieve the recipient, the contractor, the construction lender, the architect, the structural engineer, the locality, or anyone else of any obligation to inspect the property. Inspections during the period of affordability under 24 CFR 93.404 D2I. During the period of affordability, the department or its representatives must perform on-site inspections of the project to determine compliance with the ongoing property standards of subsection 93.301. To verify the information submitted by the recipient in accordance with the requirements of subsection 93.302. Advance written notice will be provided by the department to the recipient, typically 30 days. A project on Native American land is required to comply with the following: Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act and HUD's regulations at 24 CFR Part 146, equal access to HUD-assisted or insured housing requirements in 24 CFR 5.105A2. A project located on Native American lands is exempt from the following: CBC Chapters 11A and 11B, Fair Housing Act, 42 USC subsection 3601, 24 CFR Part 100, the American National Standards Institute, A 117.1 through 1986, and 24 CFR subsection 100.201A, Americans with Disability Act of 1990, 42 USC subsection 12101, Regulations at 28 CFR Part 35, Title 11, and Part 36, Title 3, 24 CFR, subsection 1000.12. Next, we will review physical design requirements. A recipient is responsible for meeting the home/NHTF multifamily rehabilitation standards for rehabilitation projects, and the link to those standards are included on the slide. Recipients must also comply with applicable state and federal building codes and standards, and adopt written policies for providing reasonable accommodations, modifications, auxiliary aids, and services for effective communications with residents and applicants with disabilities. Recipients must ensure that the project is in compliance with the following housing and building accessibility requirements: CBC Chapters 11A and 11B, the Fair Housing Act and its implementing regulations at 24 CFR Part 100, and the American Standards, the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, the UFAs at 24 CFR Part 40. And this concludes Section 5. I will now turn it over to Kendra.
Hi, I'm Kendra Gubadulan, the Specialist 2 of the NHTF program, and I will be going over Section 6, Underwriting. Underwriting is a review process to ensure that a proposed project meets all program-specific requirements, underwriting standards, and department policies, and that the project is financially feasible. This is generally referred to as feasibility review. Requirements are specified in program-specific regulations, 24 CFR 93.300, Subpart G, the NHTF guidelines, NHTF Notice of Funding Availability, NOFA, California Code of Regulation Title 25, CCR, and policies. Policies will be included in memos such as the developer fee limits, capital contributions, and transition reserve policy. Any policies you are not familiar with, we can direct you to on the HCD website. Application feasibility review includes review of development budget, funding sources, rents, unit mix, operating budget, and cash flow analysis. We will view other program project reports for any inconsistencies and special conditions. Be prepared to address any questions about changes that may have occurred after receiving another department award. Program will assess the current market demand in the neighborhood the project will be located, the expenses of the recipient, the financial capacity of the recipient, and firm written financial commitments for grants and or loans for the project. CCR Section 8310 underwriting standards require that variable loans be underwritten at the ceiling rate. Sandwich loans and balloon payments will be subordinated to a bifurcated department regulatory agreement. Public lenders, well, the department will subordinate if the funding is more than twice the size of the HCD total loan amounts. Sponsor loans will always be junior and paid from distributions. And then NHTF will subordinate to private amortizing bank loans regardless of the size. These would include, for instance, Citibank or Banner Bank. NHTF Guidelines Section 4C3 and the NOFA will address eligible uses, terms, and limits of NHTF funds. Limits on department funding include loan or grant funds on a per unit, per project, and or per recipient basis. These will be further specified in the NOFA. Costs should be separated or explained, and multiple costs are included under one line item. Relocation costs and environmental remediation listed in the summary or phase 1 may result in adjustments to the development budget. Overhead profit general requirements for the general contractor should not exceed 14% of site work plus structures per Title IV Section 10327. The hard cost contingency should be at 5% or more for rental new construction projects and at 10% or more for rehabilitation projects. For other line items, please specify the item in the application. We will view two cash flow scenarios. One will include the maximum regulated or restricted amounts. The other will include proposed or the permanent closing actual rents. Be sure to include restricted rents with restricted subsidy amounts and proposed rents with proposed subsidy amounts. The rent and utilities for extremely low income families must comply with 24 CFR subsection 93.302 B1I and B2. Rent limitations. 1I, extremely low income tenants. The NHTF rent plus utilities of an extremely low income tenant shall not exceed the greater of 30% of the federal poverty line or 30% of the income of a family whose annual income equals 30% of the median income for the area, as determined by HUD, with adjustments for the number of bedrooms in the unit. HUD will publish the NHTF rent limits on an annual basis. If the units receive federal or state project-based rental subsidy and the tenant pays as a contribution towards rent not more than 30% of the tenant's adjusted income, the maximum rent is the rent allowable under the federal or state project-based rental subsidy program. UA schedules include Public Housing Authority Utility Allowance Schedule and HUD Model Utility Allowance. Net rent is gross rent minus utility allowance. Program will defer to vacancy rates for TCAC projects with special needs or supportive housing units. Developer fee is calculated in accordance with UMR 8312 and further detailed in the administrative notice on the 2017 UMR developer fee limits and capital contribution. Projects development costs must be reasonable under 24 CCR subsection 8311 and equal total permanent sources. Developer fee may need to be deferred if the total development budget is more than the permanent funding sources. In the event the project-based rental assistance is terminated, the NHTF assisted units rent must not exceed the rent restriction in the project's regulatory agreement. program will examine all the sources and uses of funds for the project, including any operating cost assistance, operating cost assistance reserve, or project-based rental assistance with laundry, fees, commercial income. It should only support the residential project. Please note the residential project income must not support the commercial project. It's a one-way road. Commercial income will support the residential project if it is on the same parcel. High cost analysis means costs exceeding 160% at application and 170% at permanent closing or conversion of the eligible basis limits. Anything above this will be considered unreasonable. Replacement reserves per 25 CCR 8309. Rental new construction will be at least a lesser of 0.6% of structures or $500 per unit per year. Rehabilitation placeholder will be $500 per unit per year until the cost is determined by an after rehabilitation physical needs assessment or capital needs assessment. We usually exclude the cost of the manager's rent and manager's income because it should be a wash with no extra income or expenses. Be sure to include the following in your application: the full-time equivalent, FTE, specify if the manager's rent per unit equals the income, calculation for the front desk and security, supportive services paid from the operating budget. And please be sure to review the total services costs that are limited under 25 CCR 8314E. Financial expenses include amortized loans, bond issuance fee, if applicable, and other lender monitoring fees. And NHTF monitoring fees, which should grow by 3% annually. HCD monitoring fees for HCD state loans are based on 0.42% of the loan amount and will not grow. Asset management similar fees for 25 CCR 8314 must not exceed $30,000 per year starting in year 2016. They will be adjusted by 3.5% per year. These fees will include partnership fees. Miscellaneous expenses and contracts detail when they're over $25,000. We will view the operating cost per unit per year against the TCAC minimum. TCAC minimums will not include the rent-free unit, supportive services, and real estate taxes. This minimum will vary based on location, population type, and is serviced by an elevator. The department will require comparable properties to justify costs below the minimum. If cash flow should go negative before year 30, another operating reserve may be needed to bridge the gap. This reserve should be in addition to the required HCD operating reserve. NHTF projects must be feasible under 24 CFR subsection 93.302G for a minimum of 30 years. Projects will return a reasonable level of profit for the recipient, and the department will provide only enough NHTF funds for the project alone or in combination with other governmental assistance that is necessary to provide quality, affordable housing per federal NHTF regulations 24 CFR subsection 93.300B. Priority distributions. First priority is the priority deferred developer fee, and then asset management fee, partnership fee management, and similar fees. Non-priority deferred developer fee may be covered by sponsor distributions. For determining the portion of department residual receipts split with other public agencies, we will view all department funding sources, which will include operating subsidies, forgivable loans, grants, and loans. The actual amount paid down will be on the department's soft loans only. Distributions are 50% to the sponsor distributions and 50% to residual receipts to pay down the department and public agency loans. If the terms of other public agencies financing also require payments for remaining cash flow, the department may agree to share what would otherwise be its 50% share of available cash flow per Title 25 CCR. The other public agencies amount will be proportional to the agency's respective assistance amounts. This includes the total governmental assistance as defined in Section 8315, which includes the total department loans and grants. Per Section 8315, the department liens shall not be subordinated to the liens of a local government entity under either the local government assistance to the project is more than twice the size of the department's total assistance to the project, including both loans and grants. Of course, if the local government assistance to the project is more than the department's total assistance to the project, which again includes both loans and grants, local government entity must manage a portfolio of their own loans that includes over 10,000 rental units with rent and occupancy restrictions. This concludes Section 6. I will now turn it over to Colleen O'Mara.
Thank you, Kendra. Good morning. My name is Colleen O'Mara. I am an NHTF program manager, and I will be going over Section 7, Management and Maintenance. For projects located on Native American land, Housing First core components will not be applicable when using IHBG and adopted their own travel, admissions, and occupancy standards. TAOS pursuant to NHTF Section 203 and 207, 24 CFR subsection 1000.104 through 110. Projects on Native American land are exempt from AFFH and Pet Friendly Act and will govern tenancy, eviction, and termination using their tribal admission and occupancy standard. The recipient must rent vacant units to households with no less than the people specified in the schedule. Projects located outside of Native American land are subject to Fair Housing Act, FEHA, accessibility, and civil rights requirements. All supporting documentation for an accommodation request must be kept in the tenant's file and approved by the department. All supporting documentation for an accommodation request must be kept in the tenant's file and available for department's compliance review. Keep in mind, the department may request to see that documentation at any given time. The recipient is responsible for all management functions of the project. This includes a management plan that must be approved by the department prior to permanent loan closing, and any changes to the management plan must be approved. The plan must include Housing First best practice, roles, responsibilities, and delegated authority to the management agent, personal policy and staffing arrangements, tenant selection criteria and application intake, record keeping policies, rent collections and evictions, initial and annual certification of household size, income, and assets. The management plan must include tenant protection policies and practices as follows. affirmative marketing plan, affirmatively furthering fair housing, Violence Against Women's Act, appeal and grievance procedures, Pet-Friendly Housing Act, prohibited lease provisions, evictions, terminations, and collections for tenants caused damages. The recipient is responsible for all repairs and routine maintenance of the units, common areas, reasonable modification for tenants with a disability, and our commercial space. This concludes Section 7, Management and Maintenance. Section 8, the application and award process was covered in the NOFA. Section 3, application minimum requirements threshold, and in the underwriting guidelines, Section 6. This concludes Section 8, and I will now turn it over to Virginia Correa, and she will be covering Section 9A, application minimum requirements.
Thank you, Colleen. Good morning, everyone. My name is Virginia Correa, and I'm an HCD representative for the National Housing Trust Fund program, and I'll be going over Section 9. Please be advised, a project is not eligible for an award unless it meets all the minimum requirements, also known as threshold. This presentation is a summary of some of the key minimum threshold requirements and is not to be considered a complete representation. All applications must clearly contain the following: project narratives, details, construction scope of work, and financing. The narrative should provide details of the proposed project and should include, but not limited to, the following: name of the project and development team, project name and location, specify if the project is located in a rural area on Native American land or Native American fee land. All applications must clearly contain the following: assessors' parcel numbers, assembly members, state senators, U.S. senators, and congressional representatives, zoning details, site acreage. As stated here in the footnote, projects located on Native American lands are exempt from 1, 2, and 3. There may be some zoning and site acreage information on the TSR, and that is acceptable. Also, construction scope of work, number of units and their size, number of bedrooms, number of bathrooms, and unit square footage. Detailed unit mix, including affordability levels, funding sources, layering, and if any market rate units. List of amenities and services offered at the project site. Playgrounds for school-aged children up to age 12 is required at multifamily sites. List and map of amenities and services offered within 1.5 miles of the project. Specify current and proposed. Details on the project sites, location to access public transportation, shopping, medical services, recreation, schools, and employment in relation to the needs of the project's tenants. Exceptional circumstances affecting the project's development, site, or funding, like environmental or community response, project milestones, construction costs supported by third-party estimates, information adequate to determine if the project and applicant will meet the requirements of the NHTF guidelines, sections 3 through 10. Copies of all firm written financial commitments for the project, not including the following sources: tax-exempt bonds, low-income housing tax credits, funding to be provided by another department program. Detailed information of the applicant adequate to determine the experience and capacity of the applicant. Site information, evidence of site control as required by 25 CCR subsection 8303. This includes compliance, if applicable, with 25 CCR 8316 for a leasehold interest in the property. Site control for projects on Native American land. The site control information requirement will be satisfied by providing evidence of a TSR or an attorney written opinion regarding chain of title and current title status. As required, you will see here the link to get more information. Voluntary acquisition letters. These are forms provided by the department. Information adequate to determine the readiness of the project to proceed. Evidence of land use entitlement or status of city/county applications, including design review status. Preliminary title reports, not more than 90 days old. Again, not more than 90 days old. Floodplain status, including backup documentation. Maps and photos of the project's location. Utility allowance documentation may include the following: HUD letter or agreement to enter into a housing assistance payment contract, local housing authority utility allowance letter or agreement to enter into a housing assistance payments contract, HUD utility schedule model prepared by a qualified energy analyst, a California utility allowance calculator, also known as QAC, prepared by a qualified energy analysis or letter from TCAC. Property management plans that meets the requirements of Section 7, management and maintenance of these guidelines. The recipient must ensure that the project is managed by an entity approved in writing by the department that is actively in the business of managing low-income housing. Resident service plans and agreements / memorandums of understanding that include a 0.25 full-time equivalent, also known as FTE, dedicated on-site services for every 50 units in the project. For example, if you have a 49-unit project, there must be 10 hours per week of on-site resident services, such as after-school, workforce development and referral, or resource services. If you have 105 units, there must be 20 hours per week of on-site resident services. For projects located on Native American lands, the site information requirement we went over on the previous slides will be satisfied by providing evidence of a TSR or an attorney written opinion regarding chain of title and current title status as required by 25 CCR subsection 8303. Supportive services plans and agreements, memorandums of understanding that include a ratio of 1 FTE case manager for every 20 individuals. The market study must be dated within 1 year of the NHTF application submission deadline and demonstrate sufficient demand. Property appraisals must be dated within 120 days of the site control documents. For projects located on Native American lands, appraisals will be provided based on the data available. Relocation plans for non-residential businesses. For example, commercial tenants, advertisement signs, and/or meters, or a self-certification that the non-residential business relocation is not applicable with pictures of the site. For applications proposing rehabilitation or the acquisition of a project, the following are required. Tenant relocation that is in compliance with federal, state, and local laws, whichever is more stringent, or a self-certification that the tenant relocation is not applicable with pictures of the site. Physical needs assessments, market studies, property appraisals, asbestos, and mold assessments are required. If an application proposes the rehabilitation or acquisition of a building constructed prior to January 1st, 1978, a lead-based paint assessment must be submitted. Projects located on Native American lands leveraging IHBG funds are required to follow the NHTF requirements set forth in 24 CFR 1000.14. The applicant will request for all construction and permanent sources and uses of the project as part of the department's underwriting requirements that Kendra went over in section 6 of the guidelines. Any third-party documents, including but not limited to market study, appraisal, relocation plan, and environmental, asbestos, mold, and lead-based paint assessments must be prepared by an individual or firm that has the appropriate license and knowledge and experience necessary to competently prepare the document, is aware of, understands, and correctly employs those recognized methods and techniques that are necessary to produce a credible and complete document, communicates each analysis, opinion, and conclusion in a manner that is not misleading as to the true market needs for low-income residential property and the value and condition of the subject property, and is an independent third party having no interest, no identity of interest with the applicant, the partner of the applicant, the intended partner of the applicant, or with the general contractor. Rehabilitation projects located on Native American lands must include the following in the application: property appraisals based on data available, asbestos and mold assessment, lead-based paint assessments. Please note, the CIAP team has confirmed the environmental review phase 1 reports include asbestos and lead. Therefore, they are mandated for projects on Native American lands as well. Applications must be received by the deadline specified in the NOFA and must clearly demonstrate the applicant and the project meet the requirements in sections 3 through 9 of the NHTF guidelines. The total amount of the NHTF funding requested by the applicant does not exceed maximum per unit subsidy and award limits in the NOFA. There are no pending lawsuits that will prevent implementation of the project and NHTF environmental provisions. This concludes section 9 of the guidelines, and we are going to have a 5-minute break before we turn it over to Kirsten Larson, who will cover the environmental provisions in detail. Thank you.
Okay, welcome back from the break. This section will focus on the National Housing Trust Fund environmental provisions. I'm Kirsten Larson, and I oversee environmental compliance for HCD's federal and state funded projects. And I'll be presenting on the National Housing Trust Fund environmental provisions. The National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, of 1969 was created to ensure that federal agencies consider the environmental impacts of their actions and decisions. HUD implements NEPA through 24 CFR Parts 50 and 58. Part 50 reviews are completed by HUD and Part 58 are completed by the responsible entity. All HUD projects are required to perform an environmental assessment to evaluate impacts. I'll be referring to this environmental compliance as NEPA throughout the rest of my presentation. The National Housing Trust Fund was established under Section 1131 of Title I of the Housing and Economic Recovery Act of 2008. The Housing Trust Fund program allocates funds to eligible states to increase and preserve safe, affordable housing. Unlike other HUD annual programs, Housing Trust Fund does not come from the HUD budget. Therefore, HUD has no discretion over a state's selection, and the project selection is not a federal action to which NEPA requirements or consultation apply. However, because HUD is committed to ensuring safe and sanitary affordable housing and the principles of NEPA, HUD developed the National Housing Trust Fund environmental provisions, which can be found under the property standards at 24 CFR 93.301F. The housing property standards are split into two categories, which can be found at 24 CFR 93.301 F1 and 2. F1 is for new construction and F2 is specific to rehabilitation. Also, notice CPD-1614 is a helpful resource and describes how the environmental provisions are applied. Please note, HCD has created forms based on the suggested format found on the HUD Exchange. HCD's forms will be provided during the NOFA period and must be used to document environmental provision compliance. On HCD's form, we've provided an area for a detailed description. You'll include the project description that you used in the application, but you'll add to it, describing all construction activities, whether they are on-site or off-site. A good project description contains all of the individual actions needed to build the project, such as a staging area or public sidewalks and utilities and other required on and off-site activities. HCD has two forms for new construction. One is if your project only has HTF funding, and one is to be used when the project has other funding such as home or project-based vouchers. There's also two forms for rehabilitation. Again, one for if your project only has National Housing Trust Fund funds in it, and another if there is more than one funding source. Please make sure to use the HCD form, which is linked in the NOFA. The following environmental provisions are the same as the NEPA process. These sections require that you follow the HUD Exchange guidance for NEPA to document compliance. The following environmental provisions are not the same as NEPA process, and you must use the environmental provision regulations to document compliance. The environmental provisions should be assessed early in the project feasibility because the provisions lack the flexibility of NEPA. For instance, mitigation to address impacts to historic properties, farmland, and wetlands are not permitted. HTF requires compliance with each provision before a project is eligible for funding. For example, projects that must clear contamination. The contamination cleanup must be complete before receiving funding reimbursement. In special circumstances, HCD may allow a project to proceed with the construction closing with the condition that no funds can be dispersed until all environmental provisions are cleared. More detailed information about how to document compliance with all parts of the environmental provisions will be provided in environmental technical assistance sessions. All National Housing Trust Fund projects are required to complete a Phase 1. The contents and timing of the Phase 1 report are important. The Phase 1 assessment is done to an ASTM E1527-21 standard, originally set by the American Society for Testing of Materials, which is now known as ASTM International. However, the ASTM standard doesn't include some of the HUD affordable housing environmental assessment requirements. You can complete these additional items separately, or you can add them to your phase one. If you add the items to the phase one report, it is important to advise your consultant to review them to HUD's standards so they understand the requirement that needs to be met. For example, while analyzing explosive and flammable hazards, adding the 1 mile radius results to the phase one for above ground storage tanks doesn't document compliance unless there are no ASTs found. If any ASTs are located within the 1 mile search, it's required that the tank distance be calculated for separation in case of fire or explosion. Often, the phase one mistakenly evaluates the ASTs for contamination risk due to project proximity, using a 1/4 mile radius, but this doesn't meet HUD compliance for explosive and flammable hazards. If the phase one identifies environmental contamination concerns, the project must complete a phase two, showing that suspected contamination doesn't exist. If contamination exists, it needs to be addressed before environmental provision compliance can be considered complete. If the project performs contamination remediation, evidence of the cleanup and a release of acknowledgement by the appropriate oversight agency will be required for HCD to clear the section. If a site has a history of agricultural use, it's important to note the years of ag activity so it can be determined whether there is an ongoing risk of herbicide or pesticide contamination. The best way to clear the possibility of soil contamination is with soil testing during a phase two. For tribal projects located on Native American land, the applicant shall provide the department with a phase one environmental site assessment based on the best data available. The guidance tells you that a project should determine whether it will meet the environmental provisions prior to construction completion. However, the environmental provisions are very black and white. So it's important to assess your property as early as possible. For this reason, HCD requires all environmental provisions be cleared before construction closing. Occasionally, a project can proceed with construction closing with 1 or 2 unmet environmental conditions. However, there will be no funds dispersed until all of the conditions are met. For example, projects that have to clear contamination. The contamination cleanup must be complete before receiving funding reimbursement from HCD. In special circumstances, we may allow a project to proceed to construction closing with a condition that evidence of contamination cleanup is approved before funds are dispersed. If the project proceeds with construction and suddenly finds it can't meet one or more of the conditions, it may no longer be eligible for funding. None of us wants a project that suddenly develops a funding gap due to environmental conditions that can't be mitigated. So assess your property early in the process. Some of the benefits of a project funded with only National Housing Trust funds is there's no need to determine a level of review, there's no public comment or objection period, and there's no request for release of funds or certification, and of course, no authority to use grant funds. The last part of my presentation are some housekeeping items. Specifically, I want to clarify a couple of environmental items mentioned in the NOFA and guidelines. In Section C of the NOFA, there is no responsible entity verification of project readiness document. If the project has NEPA responsibility due to federal funding of the project, please submit the authority to use grant funds as proof of project readiness. There are some typos in the CEQA paragraph, and I want to be clear that the department recognizes that CEQA requirements do not apply on Native American lands. And if CEQA is required, the department will carry out the CEQA review. Also, Native American entity projects may utilize department resources to meet project environmental requirements on a case-by-case basis. This means a tribe may request HCD use department resources to comply with environmental provisions on their behalf without penalty, if the tribe does not have the resources or capacity to complete the work. As of February 13th, 2023, ASTM standard E1527-21 is the standard for conducting a phase 1. Any phase 1 using the 2013 standard after December 15th, 2023 is no longer compliant, and the new standard must be used. Make note of that for the December and February application due dates. HCD is in the process of creating an environmental web presence, but it is not ready yet. So until our web page is available, you can contact me directly for guidance or questions regarding National Housing Trust Fund environmental provision compliance when you're determining project eligibility or while documenting compliance. These are the National Housing Trust Fund environmental provision links mentioned throughout my presentation. This concludes my presentation, and I'll turn it over to Heather, who will cover the next topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsten. Hello, my name is Heather Randrup, Representative 2 of the National Housing Trust Fund Program. Section 10 selection criteria was covered by Shelley during the NOFA presentation, and more details will be shared during the application presentation by Joe and Henry. I will now cover Section 11, legal documents. The recipient is required to execute a standard agreement with the department. If the department cancels the award, there is no obligation for the department to execute a standard agreement. The standard agreement must meet the NHTF written agreement requirements under 24 CFR 93.404 and be compliant with these guidelines, state, and federal laws. The recipient must provide copies of all firm written financial commitments for the project prior to execution of the standard agreement. Before executing the standard agreement, consistency with Section 6 underwriting is to be determined by confirming the following. The project will have and maintain fiscal integrity for 30 years, will be feasible under 25 CCR 8310 for 30 years, and will have development costs reasonable under 25 CCR 8311. Underwriting consistency will also include complying with the department transition reserve policy that Kendra went over during Section 6 of the guidelines. It must return a reasonable level of profit for the recipient and will only receive enough government assistance and/or NHTF funds necessary to provide quality, affordable housing. Projects that are located on Native American land that are subject to recipients' leasehold interest must conform to the following. The ground lease must be executed by recipient prior to application or award at the discretion of the department. Ground lease after execution by the landlord and lessee must be approved by BIA prior to either the application or award for the NHTF funds, but must be received by the department prior to the execution of the standard agreement. Additional requirements include landlord and lessee must record the executed lease, lease writer, declaration of restricted covenants against the Native American land following BIA approval with the Land Title and Records Office that has the appropriate jurisdiction and in the appropriate office records in the county of which the project is located, as may be applicable. The declaration of restricted covenants must provide a 50-year period of affordability and will be recorded against the fee or the leasehold as applicable. The department does reserve the right to require any other documents or provisions to secure the department's interest, which may include the granting of a third-party beneficiary rights to the department. When a Native American entity has a project on Native American fee land, meaning the project is located within the state of California and outside the jurisdiction of a Native American government entity, owned or co-owned by a Native American entity and located outside of Native American land, a regulatory agreement must provide a 55-year period of affordability. If the land where the project is located is subject to a leasehold, the department may authorize a note to be secured by a deed of trust. The owner of the fee estate and real property the project occupies must enter into a regulatory agreement with the department governing the ownership, occupancy, management, maintenance, and operation of the project for a period not less than the minimum period of affordability required under these guidelines. The regulatory agreement must encumber the fee estate and the real property the project occupies as a lien running with the land and must be binding on all successors in interest, assignees, and transferees of the recipient. The regulatory agreement must be recorded against the fee estate in the real property the project occupies. The regulatory agreement must have priority over other liens, encumbrances, and other matters of record on the fee estate in the real property the project occupies, except as may be approved by the department under 25 CCR subsection 8310F and 8315. All loans must be evidenced by a promissory note called a note and secured by a deed of trust and assignments of rents with power of sale called a deed of trust, executed by the owner of the fee estate of the real property the project occupies, naming the department as beneficiary. The deed of trust must encumber the fee estate of the real property the project occupies, must be recorded in the county the project is located, and must have priority over other liens, encumbrances, and other matters of record on the fee estate, except as may be approved by the department under 25 CCR subsection 8310F and 8315. If the project occupies a leasehold, the department may authorize the recipient to enter into a regulatory agreement that encumbers the leasehold the project occupies instead of the fee estate in the real property the project is located on. This regulatory agreement must be a lien running with the land and must be binding on all successors in interest, assignees, and transferees of the recipient. The regulatory agreement may be recorded against the leasehold the project occupies. The regulatory agreement must have priority over other liens, encumbrances, and other matters of record on the leasehold the project occupies, except as may be approved by the department under 25 CCR subsection 8310F. If the department authorizes the deed of trust and regulatory agreement to encumber a leasehold, then the lease must conform to the requirements of 25 CCR subsection 8316A2, and the department must be a party to the lease. If the department uses a lease writer to comply with this subsection, the lease writer must amend the lease and be recorded on the fee estate from which the lease is derived. The fee owner of the real property must execute the department's form template lease writer without modification. Native American entities that are recipients must provide the department with a limited waiver of sovereignty and immunity in the department standard agreement and all other department loan and transaction documents, included but not limited to a lease rider and a declaration of restricted covenant on Native American land, or if the project is on Native American fee land, a regulatory agreement would be reported. The Native American entity may accomplish this by executing and referencing a separate instrument that provides the department and the state of California with a limited waiver of sovereign immunity. If the department disperses NHTF funds during construction, then the recipient must enter into a construction loan agreement with the department that governs the disbursement of the NHTF funds based on criteria established by subsection 93.902. The recipient must execute the department's sponsor operating guarantee to provide assurance that the recipient has the resources and experience to develop, own, and manage the project. The recipient and project owner must also execute and enter into additional agreements and documents as the department may require. These additional agreements and documents are subject to the approval of the department. If the department disperses funds during construction, the department will record a senior regulatory agreement that is superior to all other liens associated with the project's debt. The senior regulatory agreement will include affordability restrictions consistent with 25 CCR subsection 8310F and supportive services when required as a condition of the NHTF award. See subsection 11C1 through 19 of the NHTF guidelines, which detail the regulatory agreement contents. This concludes section 11, and I'm going to cover the next section, project setup and disbursement of funds. The following must happen in order to set up in HUD's disbursement and information system. The recipient must submit the project setup report prior to the first disbursement request. The department must verify the project complies with conditions within the standard agreement, and upon verification of these items, the department must set up the project in Federal Disbursement and Information System, also known as IDIS. The department must draw down NHTF funds and make requests for disbursements directly to the Federal Disbursement and Information System after receipt of IAI certification and payment form, which will remain in the permanent project file. Loan retention is 10% of the development hard costs and will be released after the department approves the project completion and loan closing requirements in the standard agreement. The department must withhold disbursements in the event the recipient fails to comply with the standard agreement guidelines, 24 CFR Part 93, or any other applicable federal and state laws. The recipient must expend NHTF funds drawn for eligible costs within 7 days. Interest earned on NHTF drawn funds and remaining funds in local account and no more than 15 days, and are to be used for eligible NHTF costs. Unused funds beyond 15 days must be returned to the department for repayment to HUD. To comply with HUD's 120-day deadline, the recipient must provide to the department the project completion report required by 24 CFR 93.402D within 90 days of receipt of the final drawdown request. If the recipient does not comply with the 90-day time period, the department must suspend further project setup or disbursements until the project completion report is received and accepted by the Federal Disbursement and Information System. This concludes section 12, and I will also cover the next section, 13, reporting and record keeping. Reporting requirements will include providing a monthly status report to the department no later than 10 days following the last day of the month. The monthly status reports are required once the standard agreement has been executed and until the final project completion report is accepted in the Federal Disbursement and Information System. If the project is currently under construction, a monthly labor compliance certification will be needed as applicable. The monthly status report must include the following: the progress on the environmental and labor standards requirements, status on obtaining all necessary project financing, the progress on obtaining required local government approvals, changes in project site control, timeline for completion of the project, and current contract information for all parties overseeing the development of the project. Project owners may implement duly adopted tribally determined prevailing wages in accordance with NHTF in lieu of state of California prevailing wages. The department encourages the recipient seek counsel on this wage determination. Once the department has received the standard agreement and the final project completion report is accepted in the Federal Disbursement and Information System, the recipient must also submit a quarterly performance report. This is due no later than 30 calendar days after the end of each calendar quarter. A performance report is also required and must include the following: activities done and anticipated to carry out the project and to meet the milestones in the standard agreement, any problems or complaints received during the reporting period, and what actions that will be taken to resolve these items, financial information that supports the usage of NHTF funds and activity in the local account, and any other information requested by the department to ensure compliance of guidelines, state and federal laws. The recipient will also be required to provide a cost certification completed by a public accountant for any project assisted with NHTF funds. During the state affordability period and no later than 90 days after the end of each project fiscal year, the recipient must submit an independent audit of the project that has been prepared by a certified public accountant that includes an annual compliance report that includes tenant demographics and income verification. The recipient must also provide proposed financing as detailed in Section 14 no later than 60 days prior to the end of each project fiscal year. And on an annual basis, the recipient is to report to the department on the services provided to residents in these units, as well as qualifying characteristics of these residents. Recipients must maintain and retain these records for a specific period set forth in 24 CFR 93.407B. All records are to be available to the department for inspection and review and must be provided upon request. In conclusion, the department may require additional reports to ensure the recipient or project will comply with these guidelines and applicable state and federal laws. This concludes Section 13, and I will turn it over to Jessica Mora, who will cover the next topic.
Thank you, Heather. Hello, I am Jessica Mora, NHTF Representative 2, and I will be going over Section 14, Annual Operating Budget and Schedule of Rental Income. The recipient must submit an operating budget and schedule of rental income report, also known as the SRI, to the department for approval. This is required before NHTF loan closing and prior to occupancy. The initial operating budget must reflect anticipated income, expenses for management, operations and maintenance, debt services, and reserve deposits. The initial SRI must reflect the proposed rents, unit designation, which include the AMI percentages, funding sources, and rental subsidies. Please keep in mind that during the initial operating year, the recipient must operate the project in accordance with the approved operating budget and SRI. During the period of affordability, the operating budget and SRI report must be submitted to the department 60 days prior to the end of the project's fiscal year. The annual SRI must be approved by the department before enacting any rent adjustments. This concludes Section 14. Section 15, project deadlines, was covered in the NOFA by Michael, and now I'll pass it over to Colleen O'Mara, who will review the next section.
Hi, my name is Colleen O'Mara, NHTF Program Manager, and I will be going over Section 16, Sales, Transfers, Encumbrance, and Loan Payoff. A recipient must not directly or indirectly sell, assign, transfer, or convey a project receiving NHTF funds or any interest therein or portion thereof without the express prior written approval of the department. The department may approve a sale, transfer, or conveyance only if the existing recipient complies with the regulatory agreement and other loan documents, or the sale, transfer, or conveyance will result in the cure of any existing violations. The successor in interest to the recipient agrees to assume all obligations of the existing recipient under the regulatory agreement and other loan documents and the program. The successor in interest is an eligible recipient and demonstrates to the department's satisfaction that it can successfully own and operate the project and comply with these guidelines and any applicable state and federal law, and no terms of the sale, transfer, or conveyance jeopardizes either the department's security or the successor's ability to comply with these guidelines and any applicable state and federal law. In the case of Native American land, where a fee to trust application has been submitted to BIA, legal impacts will need to be addressed on a case-by-case basis. The department is asking Native American entities to schedule a technical assistant appointment with NHTF program via NHT NOFA at hcd@ca.gov to discuss details and options far in advance of submitting the application. If the department approves a sale, assignment, transfer, or conveyance under provisions of subsection 16A, the department must grant its approval subject to such terms and conditions as may be necessary to preserve or establish the fiscal integrity of the project. Such conditions may include, but not limited to, the deposit of sale proceeds or portion thereof to maintain required reserves or to offset negative cash flow. If the recipient or its successor in interest is a partnership, the recipient must not discharge or replace any general partner or amend, modify, or add to the partnership agreement or cause or permit the general partner to amend, modify, or add to the organizational documents of the general partner without the prior written approval of the department. The recipient may not transfer limited partnership interest without the prior written approval of the department. The recapture of syndication proceeds or other funds in accordance with special conditions include in any agreement executed by the recipient and or such conditions as may be necessary to ensure compliance with these guidelines and any applicable state and federal law. Without prior written approval of the department, the recipient must not encumber, pledge, or hypothecate the project or any interest therein, portion thereof, allow any lien charge or assessment against the project. The department must not permit refinancing or additional financing secured by the project except to the extent necessary to maintain or improve the fiscal integrity of the project, to maintain affordable rents, or to decrease rents for no other purpose, including but not limited to cash payments to the recipient. Notwithstanding the general provisions in 25 CCR subsection 8308G, no project reserve balance can fund a limited partner buyout or exit. No loan may be paid off prior to maturity without the prior written consent of the department in its sole discretion. The department's consent is subject to conditions deemed necessary to ensure compliance with these guidelines and any applicable state and federal law. All loan documents, including the regulatory agreement and deed of trust, must continue in full force and effect, notwithstanding any prepayment in whole, in part of the loan. This concludes section 16. I will be going over section 17, program income and repayments. Program income only applies to the department, not the recipient. Therefore, we will begin with repayment requirements for NHTF. Should either of these circumstances apply, the department will instruct the recipient on how the funds must be repaid. This concludes section 17. I will now cover section 18, cancellation and defaults. The documents listed on this slide are the agreements that HCD generates to secure NHTF fundings. Assembly Bill 816 gives HCD the authority to write guidelines for implementation of the program and create agreements that drive the funding. These written agreements ensure compliance with the regulations and guidelines. NHTF regulations require that HCD properly manages the day-to-day operations of the NHTF funds. HCD must have and follow written policies, procedures, and systems, which include risk assessments to ensure requirements are met. The performance and compliance of each contractor must be monitored regularly. In the event of cancellation or default, the department may give written notice, amend agreement, or adjust the award accordingly. While focusing on the element of the written agreement requirement, HCD must, in compliance with HUD regulations, and must have remedies in place for breach of this provision of the HCD agreements. HCD must also include language specific to termination or suspension if the contractor fails to comply. The department may cancel or reduce an award if the project is not in compliance, the standard agreement is terminated, or projects does not comply with the guidelines. These examples can be considered a breach of contract. Here are some additional reasons for cancellation or reduction of the award. Additional requirements of the department include giving notice of the intent to cancel or reduce the award. Any bifurcation of the project would make the award null and void. The recipient completes any work affected that is in progress and terminates any planned activities. This action may also affect future applications for funding submitted to the department, and all payments must be returned within the required 30 days. This concludes the review of the final NHTF guidelines. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and when we return, we will begin the NHTF application and workbook review.
Welcome back. Good morning. My name is Joseph McNicholas, National Housing Trust Fund Representative 2. Henry Chang and I will be going over the application section. This presentation will be a combination of PowerPoint slides and live demonstrations of the Excel workbook and the eCivis application. Before downloading the Excel workbook and setting up an eCivis profile, please familiarize yourself with the National Housing Trust Fund NOFA and guidelines to ensure our program fits your potential project. The first step is assessing eCivis and setting up an account. The required Excel workbook is accessible in 2 locations. One, on HCD's website. Select Programs Active, then the National Housing Trust Fund Program tab, and then select Apply Now. Or 2, on the eCivis website. I would like to emphasize that eCivis is a web-based portal where you complete and submit your National Housing Trust Fund application. The eCivis user manual is available on the eCivis solicitation page and on the National Housing Trust Fund webpage. After one profile is set up to access eCivis, please grant access to 2 additional staff within the application as a backup. Otherwise, only one person will have access. The link below is the website to the eCivis online National Housing Trust Fund application. Now, I will do a live demonstration of how to navigate the National Housing Trust Fund Excel workbook. Once you've downloaded the workbook, there may be an Enable Content or an Enable Macros button at the top of the workbook. Select this button to enable the content and macros so the workbook will function correctly. You will notice the tab sections of the workbook along the bottom. You will need to complete these tabs in order from left to right. Please note that the cells you encounter in the workbook will be different colors. A yellow cell is an unprotected cell which requires data input by the sponsor or applicant. An orange cell alerts you that a document may need to be uploaded into the eCivis portal. Blue cells are unprotected cells which require data entry. These appear on the Selection Criteria tab, where you would enter your self-score points. Red cells alert you that data you have entered has failed to meet a requirement. The first 3 tabs of the workbook are instructions and informational tabs. No applicant input is required on these 3 tabs, but please review these tabs. The cover page and the Entity Org Docs tab, which is a reference for which organizational documents may apply to the organizational structure of your project. The data entry portion of the workbook starts at the Project Overview tab. Here you will be able to add a description of your property, so tell us about your project. You will notice some of the input fields have drop-downs and some are free-form. For example, on row 69, you will encounter a drop-down, which provides you a choice of options for you to select. I've selected Amador County here. I would like to demonstrate that additional sections of the workbook will open based on how the preceding question was answered. For example, in row 79, you'll notice that if the yes dropdown is selected, additional information would be required. This is to inform you that if you've been awarded funds, you'll need to upload the award letter into the eCivis portal. On row 89 is an upload prompt field. This is to alert you that once in eCivis, as I will demonstrate later, you will upload a document. Not every upload field will apply to your project. On row 112, you see a pre-filled cell. The county you selected above in row 69 has pre-filled here. Throughout the Excel workbook, you will notice that as you complete the tabs from left to right, more information will be pre-filled for you. Row 112 is a protected field. So to change this field, you would need to change the county above in row 69. On row 142, you will encounter a link. Once you select the link, you'll be taken to a web page or source document to assist you in answering the question. On row 147, I would like to demonstrate that your answer options will change based on how you answer 146. So I select yes here, and you see my options are highest and highest resource. However, if I selected no, my options change. Some cells have a red caret or arrow in the right corner of the cell. If you hover over the red caret, you will get some helpful hints or information to help you complete the question. On row 239, I would like to demonstrate that information you input on this project overview tab will carry over into many other tabs. On row 285, you'll notice that there are many additional note sections in the workbook where you can freeform or provide additional explanations to your answers. The explanation or clarification you provide will be reviewed by your HCD team. On row 317, you will see a red outline box. This is to emphasize that the data in this section will carry over to many other required sections and other tabs within the workbook. So basically, it's important that this is completed. On row 490, you will enter your project milestones. The milestone dates you provide will be memorialized in the standard agreement if you receive an award. I'd like to state that National Housing Trust Fund deadline dates are set by HUD with strict construction and closing deadlines. On row 502, if I enter a date that is out of compliance with the HUD deadline, it will turn red. Let me demonstrate. You will notice that it is turned red. If I enter a date in compliance, it will remain yellow. At the bottom, again, you can provide additional comments. The next tab, going from left to right, is the contact list tab. You will notice here what I entered in the previous tab has carried over, but you still are required to input the information in the yellow tabs. The next is development sources. I will demonstrate, I will enter a bank name here, And as you complete this, you will see this where this will carry over throughout the workbook. The next tab is Max Loan. As you see, as you complete the information in the workbook, many of these white protected fields will be pre-filled and completed for you. The next tab is the Budget tab. Notice that the ABC Bank you input and development sources appears here in row 4. On row 21 of the development budget, you'll see the site work funds row. However, this is a protected field. If you click on the site works blue link, you'll be taken to where you complete in detail the site work categories. Also, you notice the blue link here. It will return you back to where you were. On the operating budget, you'll enter the income expenses of the project. Please note that the comment boxes where you explain an expense there's a comment box to explain expense if necessary. For example, on row 107, you may enter other supportive costs, but please provide a detailed description of the other comments in the comments section. There are also some free-form fields where you can list an expense not pre-filled on the operating budget. If you list an expense, please explain what it is. Do not simply state other as an expense without an explanation in the comment section provided. This may cause delays in reviewing of your application. Let me input some information here to demonstrate how it will flow over. Complete the unit mix from left to right. Your project rents limits are based on the information you entered, including the county you entered on the project overview. Starting on row 53 is where you enter your subsidy rents. Many items on the cash flow tab are pre-filled from the unit mix and operating budget. As you can see here, the information I entered on the operating budget has carried over onto cash flow. I will now turn it over to Henry, who will continue demonstrating the Excel workbook.
Hey, thank you, Joe. Hi, everyone. This is Henry, and I'm going to take over the workbook overview from now. So we'll start with the site and neighborhood standards worksheet. Please note this is a worksheet that is that's strictly for new construction project only. So the top section on the column B from row 4 to row 6. So this is the project information, but it is linked to the workbook. So once you enter the information once under project overview tab, then this section will be automatically populated. And then moving down to row 12 and row 13, you will see the regulations that links to this worksheet. Please review the related regulation if you are not familiar with this requirement. And the remaining of the worksheet will be detailed out each of the requirement with description. So for example, on the row 17 and column A there, you will see the related sections from CFR 983.57. In this case is the section E1, and next to it, column B is the description of the requirement. And column C is where you can mark whether the project meets the requirement or not, with a drop-down selections of yes, no, and not applicable. And column D is where you need to notate the supporting documentations for the related requirement. For example, if the supporting document is a market study, then you will need to put market study under this cell. And lastly, under column E is where you need to put the page number of the supporting documentations to flag where the info is located at. This will help us to expedite the review. And once we filled out the rest of the worksheet, then we want to scroll down to the bottom, start from row 42. This is the sections where you need to put your print name, title, and sign with a wet signature. You'll be asked to upload the signed version of this worksheet when you start working on the Syngent portal. Now moving on to the next tab, which we will be covering the reserves calculator. Under this tab, you will notice that under row 4, it is also requesting the project information. The concept is the same, and it will be automatically populated as well once we filled out the information 1. And from row 6 to row 10, where I'm highlighting at, this is the part where the worksheet will calculate the replacement reserves. There's no action required from the applicant, as the calculator will be pulling information from the applications to do all the calculations. We will just need to make sure we are meeting the requirement, and if we have budgeted for more than the required amount, please be sure we provide explanation and supporting information for it. And once we finish reviewing the replacement reserves, starting from row 12 and all the way down to row 43, this is the calculator for operating reserve. The logic is the same, and the calculator will be pulling the information from the applications to complete the calculation itself. And from cell AF31 and AJ31, where I'm highlighting right now, you will see there are 2 different categories, one for tax credit project and the other one for non-tax credit project. Please be sure to review the appropriate cell to confirm the requirement. Something slightly different under this calculator is under cell D28 to 29 and also AB28 and 29. So you can see the cells are filled with yellow, which means these cells are open field, where you can input the information manually if applicable. And those will not be pulling from the applications. Please ensure they are filled out as needed for the calculations to run accurately. And under row 33 is where you can enter the explanations and the calculation if the reserve amount are different than the required amount. Next, we will scroll further down to row 36 to 55. So this is the area where the transition reserve pool fee calculator is located at. So from row 36, you will see there is a hyperlink. And this hyperlink will bring you to the related memo so that it will allow you to review the announcement if you're not familiar with this feed. And under the yellow cell from row 41 to 45, you want to fill out the required voucher information and enter the contract year under cell Q39 and also AJ39 where I highlighted. And from row 49 to 53, so this is the area where you input the local operating subsidy information. And once you've filled out all the appropriate yellow cells, then moving down under cell K55, it will calculate the required pool transition reserve fee amount. Lastly, under row 58, this is the comment box that you can utilize if you have any comments or notes that you would like to add to this reserve calculator tab. And next, we'll be going over the high cost verification tab. So under the high cost verification worksheet, majority of the information will be automatically populated based on how we complete the application. And under column N, from row 8 to 12, so these cells will map over the respective unit count and return the amount under column P from row 8 to 12 as well. And on the right side, under AH7 to AH12, these cells will show the limit and the high cost test result in percentage. Then return with the final result to show whether the cost is reasonable or not under cell AC13. However, before all these calculations to work, we also want to make sure we answer all the questions from row 16 and all the way to 51. And there are yellow cells under column AF. And those cells will allow you to put yes or no for each of the questions. And some questions will trigger additional questions based on the response. So for example, under AF.2 here, question E. So if we put yes as a response, you can see it's loading for more questions. So, and once we see all these new questions pops up, please ensure we filled out all the wistful one for the calculators to work properly. In addition, the amount will be populating under column AH on the right side for the respective row if it resulted in an adjustment. And then the adjustment will roll back to the top section we went over earlier and finalize the result. Now moving on to the next tab, the Management and Maintenance Certification Worksheet. So this is a checklist / certifications that links to Section 7 of the National Housing Trust Fund Program Guidelines. You will find the item description from column B, row 6 to 28, and then the document or reference under column C from row 6 to 28. What we need to accomplish here is to review the related documentation under column C and make sure it is meeting the requirements showing under column B. And once we confirmed with the result, then we select whether yes or no under column D here for the respective row. And then moving down to row 30 to 33. So this is where we confirm if the supporting documentation has been uploaded. And under row 37 is where you can provide explanation if any of the required documentations cannot be provided. And lastly, we will need to fill out the project and contact information under row 40 to 44 and sign with a wet signature. Moving on next, we'll be going over the developer fee worksheet. Under this tab, in order for all the formulas to be functional, specific to the project, there are some cells that we need the applicant's attention. So the first cell you want to target is P5. This is a cell where you can select the appropriate project type, as I'm showing on the screen now. And this cell is very critical as the calculator will pull up different set of UMR requirements below row 13 based on the project type. And under cell AI4 here, that's where we can put the TCAC project number if available. And the table under AA7 to AI10, with these table will be populating with the amount once we fill out the questions under row 13. And for cell Y12 and also AI12 is where we can enter the developer fee contributed as capital and deferred developer fee, if any. So now we are moving down to look at the rows that are beyond row 13. So the current project type that we have, for example, is no tax credit, which the worksheet is pulling up the UMR 8312A for this project type. Please review the UMR carefully prior to fill out the questions below row 13, as not all the yellow cells are required to be filled. And once you've filled out those that you find applicable, then the table on top we covered earlier will run the max developer fee and other fields for the proposed project. Please note the fee is program specific And if the project has accelerated funds involved, then we would defer to their calculator and rule subject to change. Next, we'll be going over the Supportive Sources Plan tab. So the Supportive Sources Plan tab is a very intense tab that requires some detailed information. So from column C, row 5 to 25 here, it is a self-tracking table that separates to a total of 7 sections. Each yellow cell allows you to mark yes or no to keep track of the completion of this worksheet. And on the right side, under W8 to AK21, so this is a table where you can put the targeting population. So for column W, respective row, it has a drop-down menu for you to select the appropriate options. And next to it, under column AI, this is where you put the total special needs populations unit count. And next to it, column AK here is where you enter the NHTF assisted unit count. And you will see there's a little red corner on the cell, which you can review the notes for each of the 2 cells if you can't recall what you're supposed to enter under it. It has a quick reference for you as we can see on the screen. And in terms of the detail of each section, we will use part 1, section 1 as a demo, and it is located under row 29 and all the way to row 60. So there are multiple questions under the row and follow with the yellow field response box for you to address that related questions. So for example, row 32 here, we have question B listed. And row 33, you will see the response box for you to address the questions B from row 32. And another example is row 54 here. So you'll see the question under the same row, and there's an answer box right next to it under column Z on the respective row, where it contains a drop-down menu for you to select the appropriate response. We encourage you to complete all sections as detailed as possible. And if you need any assistance or if you have any questions, you can always request for technical assistance sections, and we can address that with you offline. Next, we'll be going over Supportive Sources Cost tab. So under the Supportive Sources Cost worksheet, there are a few areas that you will need to fill out. So first, under cell AB6 here, we want to fill out the current year in a 4-digit format. Then moving on to cell AD7 to 11, this is where we enter the total unit count that is meeting each of the category under column B here where I'm highlighting. So once we filled out the yellow cells, then we just mentioned, then under column AF and AI here, the respective row cells will populate the max per unit per year amount and also the max cost accordingly. And under AI12, this will be the cell that we use to reveal the subtotal of the maximum supportive sources cost. And we encourage applicants to double check the budget to ensure we're within the limit. Moving on, we'll be looking at the resident sources tab. So under this tab, it is very similar to the supportive sources plan tab that we went over earlier. What we are seeing on the screen now is the beginning of the worksheet. So under column B, 9 to 20, so this is also a table to keep track of the completion of this worksheet. However, slightly different is this will be automatically updated and result will be changed to yes and color in green based on the completion of the worksheet. So you do not need to do any self-tracking. Instead, you can come to the top to review this table to ensure all section has been completed accordingly. And on the right side under column H, so this will tell you the title of the main section and also the subsection information. So we will also use part 1 as example here, where it is under row 30 and all the way down to 43. Same logic as the supportive sources plan. you will see the questions then follow with the response box. So for example, row 34 with the questions, then row 35, we will see the response box to address the questions. And under row 61, column AL here, so this also provides you an example showing row 61 has the questions and cell AL61 is the response box that contains the drop down for you to select on. Please do check through the entire worksheet carefully and ensure we filled out all the yellow cells as applicable. And again, please do reach out to us for assistance if needed. Next, we will be covering the NHTF Environmental Review tab. So for this NHTF Environmental Review worksheet, this is very critical to ensure we complete this. All the yellow cells will need to be filled out. So from row 4 to row 14 is where we put the project information, and scroll down to row 16. This is where the worksheet is outlining the requirement for the environmental clearance. And you will find a couple of hyperlinks under N20 and 21 that will link to the environmental requirement information if you're not familiar with it. And moving down to row 24 to 26, you will fill out the yellow cells under column I to AL for the respective row and based on the EQA and NEPA requirements. If any of the fields marked as not applicable or not required, then you can utilize cell A20X to enter the explanations and outline the type of supporting documentations that you will be providing if applicable. And lastly, for this top section, under row 30 to 38 is where you put your information and signed as well. And cells AK36 to 38 is where you can certify the supporting documentation has been uploaded. So you see the options with a drop-down menu here. Now we're scrolling down to row 41. So this row 41 is where we put the land use entitlements information. And under column A here is where the description located. And from row 48 to 52 under column A, you can see these are open fields for other variants that we can manually input. And from column B43 to AJ52 is where we can enter the responses for the respective rows. And under A54 here, this is also a comment box that you can utilize to input explanations on why any of the items are not required and what type of supporting documentations you will be providing. And scroll further down from row 57 to 61. This is where you want to print name, date, and sign. And please make sure we do wet signature, and you will be required to upload the signed versions to the Signature portal. Next, we'll be covering the selections criteria tab. So under the selections criteria tab, the very beginning of it, you will see the point summary table where it is located under K9 to AJ19. So from K9, you will see the description of each section. And then under column AD, these cells will be the minimum sections points required. And next to it, column AG will be the maximum possible section points. And next to it, column AJ will be the project self-score, all for their own respective rows. Then under row 19, from column AD to AJ here, you will see the total applicable points for each respective column. As you are completing this worksheet, the point table will be automatically updated based on your responses. And once you finish the worksheet, then we suggest you to come back to this table and review your scoring. So we will use section A as a quick example under this presentation. So it starts from row 38 to 57. And on the cell AN38 here, the blue cell represents the points that you scored under the section. And this will route back to the summary table we saw earlier and sum them up together. And under D39, this will be the description of the section item. And from row 40 to 50 is a table we need the applicants to fill out in order for the scoring to work. And scroll down further to row 53 to 57. You will see the self-certification areas to confirm the supporting documentation has been uploaded to the HCD portal. And each section will look very similar to what we are seeing on the screen, and we suggest you to spend some additional time under this tab to ensure each field is completed. Next we'll be going over is the sponsor certification. So under this worksheet is basically a self-certification. So what applicant needs to do is to review each line, and under row 5 to 10 here, and if there's any disclosure, we want to list them under the cell B8 if applicable. And once completed, then we can proceed to row 13 to fill out the contact information and complete with a wet signature. So scroll further down from row 16 to 41. So this is where the legal disclosure is located at. Same logic as the top section. We will need to review each row and certify the answer. And you will find the response box under column AL for the respective row. Once completed, then we scroll further down to row 42. This will be another row for pre-named and complete with a wet signature. And lastly, under row 45 and 46, these two rows will be final certifications of the supporting documentation that has been uploaded. Moving on to the next tab is the document checklist full list tab. So this tab basically is showing all the documentation we requested throughout the workbook. And it is more like the review tab for applicants to ensure you have uploaded all the required information. We highly suggest you to double check each of them to ensure you're submitting a complete application and workbook. And under column E, you will find the name of the requested document. And under column N, you will see the description of the item. So what we need to complete here under this worksheet is to reconfirm the respective documents has been uploaded to the Syngent portal and confirmed it under AJ, column AJ. So you will see a drop-down menu that allows you to select if included, not included, or not applicable. And now moving on to the last tab of the workbook, which is the workbook support. So for this worksheet, this is basically a support function. For example, if you run into any issues or errors, or simply have any questions that you would like to request for technical assistance sections, we recommend you to utilize this tab to outline all your concerns and issues before the meeting. So under row 6 and 7 here, that's where you put your information and the request date. And we have a table set up under row 12 and all the way down to row 32. So this is where you can list the support that you need. And under column D here, for the respective row, you will list the tab or the worksheet's name. So for example, if you need support under the selection criteria worksheet, then you will put selection criteria under the cell. And next to it, column K is where you put the section of that worksheet that you need assist on. And column Q here is the cell number reference, so that we can go directly to where the issue occurred. And next to it, under column S is where you can put the issues that you're running into, such as a quick description of the issues. And lastly, column AE is where you can select from the drop-down menu on the urgency level. By completing this worksheet, if needed, This will allow the assigned representative to go directly to the respective worksheet and assist you, and that will allow us to be more efficient and will be more likely to be able to go through all the issues in a timely manner. Now, this concludes the workbook review. I'm going to turn it back to Joe to cover the remaining of the items. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. We will now return back to the PowerPoint. So once you have completed the Excel workbook, you should now return and review all the Excel tabs again for accuracy. After the entire workbook is completed, all the calculations will function correctly. I will summarize the application process in the next PowerPoint slides and then return to another live demonstration of the eCivis application portal. So once you've logged in, select the 2022-2023 National Housing Trust Fund workspace and download the Excel workbook. First, complete the entire workbook from tabs left to right in order to assure full functionality of the workbook. Second, log back into eCivis and select the 2022-2023 National Housing Trust Fund workspace. Third, select the application portal. Each project must select only one application portal and one pool of funds, and must include the uploaded Excel workbook and the other required documents in order to apply for this NOFA round. The portal for Group 1 deadline is December 28th, 2023. These are the rural target areas and non-rural target areas. The portal for Group 2 deadline is February 1st, 2024. This includes the Native American entities and the federally declared disaster areas. The Excel workbook has a unique color-coded system. Each color denotes a different function. Yellow cells are for applicant input. Orange cells are the required attachments. Blue cells keep track of your self-score in each section and the overall total score. And red cells are meant to indicate that a failed requirement or minimum points has not been met. And the white cells are the pre-filled figures from other tabs. After the Excel National Housing Trust Fund workbook is complete, the applicant will now continue the application submittal process via eCivis. When every step in this submission is complete, the submit button to the right will become green and clickable. The application is not fully submitted until you click the green submit button. Once you click submit, the submission will no longer be editable. Many upload fields are marked as required. If you encounter a required upload field in eCivis, but the documentation requested does not apply to your project, upload a document stating not applicable. Only one document can be uploaded per upload field. If you need to upload multiple documents into a single upload field, then convert the document into a singular large zip file. I will now have another live demonstration of the eCivis portal. Bear with me. As you see here, here is the eCivis landing page. You will go to your portal login, and you'll see the profile that you've created. You will have a solicitation link here for the National Housing Trust Fund, and you will select that link. Now I'll demonstrate what the eCivis portal will look like. So here we are in the eCivis application portal. You'll notice here that here's the profile you just completed or completed at a previous time. You can go in and edit your profile and update it. You will notice here that here's where the application process begins. So this is a demo portal, so don't pay attention to the 64 days remaining. You have much more time, and that'll be correct when you actually apply. So when I click on the application, you will notice that I will have these forms in eCivis. And these forms are very similar in title and in name to what you saw on the Excel workbook. I would like to point out that some of the data that you entered in the Excel workbook will need to be entered again in the eCivis application portal. Yes, some information will be entered twice in the Excel workbook and the portal. Also, there may be questions in the eCivis portal that did not appear in the Excel workbook. So here, this applications, I have marked it as complete, but I may go in and edit it, which I will demonstrate. As you can see, these are many questions you would need to answer. I'd like to point out that here is an upload field that we've been talking about in the workbook, and here is where you would upload the National Housing Trust Fund workbook. If you see a red asterisk, that means this is a required field, and information must be entered here. I can save my changes. I can also view this application as a completed form without the questions to check my work and see if I have it accurate. So you would complete these forms, applications, project overview, and some of the forms have similar names to the Excel tabs we looked at, and some forms will have a different name. So not every tab on the Excel workbook would have a tab in eCivis. You would go ahead and complete all these till you get a green submit button. And after you hit the green submit button, your application will be submitted to us for review. So now I would like to return to the PowerPoint. I'd like to go over some helpful hints. So do not wait until the last minute to create your eCivis profile. and become familiar with the eCivis application process. eCivis is an outside vendor, and eCivis IT support is available to assist you in the process. However, it may take some time for eCivis to respond. Remember, click on the Enable Editing or the Enable Content buttons. Do not use Apple products. Please refrain from copying and pasting information into the workbook, as it could corrupt the formulas placed in certain fields. Altering the workbook or manipulating Excel formulas will invalidate the application. Ensure you're submitting all the required documents. Applications must be complete for the department to perform a review, and complete the application to minimize error messages. On the National Housing Trust Fund homepage, you may view resources to download and the National Housing Trust Fund workbook. So, we are committed to working with our communities in response to the needs of those who are struggling to find safe and affordable housing. So join us today in shaping the future of affordable housing funding. We appreciate your time and commitment to this important cause. If you've not already done so, please sign up to receive information on future funding opportunities, National Housing Trust Fund, and other HCD programs on our email registration link here. We hope you apply, and the National Housing Trust Fund team looks forward to reviewing your application. On behalf of HCD, we thank you for attending our workshop. Remember, be sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter, and LinkedIn. Bye, and thanks again.
I would like to thank all of the panelists for presenting today, and our guest panelists from Tribal Affairs and Tribal Legal Affairs, and also thank all attendees. We are going to stop the recording now.